That brings me to my remarks, and I was walking over here and thinking, how should I begin what I wanted to say this evening? And I thought, it's budget night. And so I'm additionally grateful that you're all here, not getting the popcorn ready for the budget. As a ex-Canberran, it is one of the most exciting nights of the year.
In Canberra.
In Canberra, doesn't take much. But certainly, and it is budget night, and that made me think about a few things. It made me think about the federal election, and it also made me think about budgets and the idea that I was lucky enough to address the annual general meeting last year, and I suppose in a way that felt a bit like a first budget. It was a good news budget. There were some happy things to say, and I suppose this is in a way my second budget, and perhaps it won't be such a happy occasion. This might be the bad news budget. And if there's any doubt as to why I might be in a bit of a bad mood this evening, in part that's because of what happened yesterday in relation to the suspension of the visit by OPCAT inspectors in Australia, and the obstruction by the governments, particularly the New South Wales government and the Queensland government. So a bipartisan spread in relation to obstruction. And it's quite an extraordinary event, and it's something that we should really focus on and pause to think about. We in Australia purport to be good global citizens. We're happy to lecture other nations when they fall short of what we regard as being fundamental human rights norms. Yet we are one of now only 4 nations to have who've ratified, so we've signed the paper, we've agreed to be bound by the optional protocol, and yet our conduct as a nation has seen inspections suspended. It truly is a shocking event, and it's made me think a bit about Australia as a global citizen, and again, as part of perhaps a bad budget story, it's made me think that we really, in a lot of ways, are a terrible global citizen. And because not only do we have OPCAT, the suspension of that, and political leaders, this is perhaps even worse, seeking to make mileage politically of the obstruction. These do-gooders coming and want to tell us how to run our prisons. There's political mileage, it appears, for people to want to appear obstructive. That's shocking. It's shocking also that these places that we know are dens of abuse are not going to be inspected by OPCAT as an independent umpire. We know the disproportionate impact of imprisonment in Australia on women and First Nations peoples. We know that can result in deaths in custody, does result in deaths in custody, and yet we've seen the spit hoods, we've seen the images from detention facilities, and of course it's not just prisons, we're talking about institutions, psych wards, we're talking about all places where sunlight is the best disinfectant and where people can be completely disempowered and not have anyone to complain to about the way that they're treated when the doors are shut and no one else is seeing what's going on. And without dwelling on it, anyone that followed the Veronica Nelson inquest knows the way that prisoners are treated when people don't think that their manner of treatment will be recorded or will ever see the light of day. And then that also made me think about other areas in which we're proving ourselves to be a terrible global citizen, and perhaps most notably, Labor, sadly, has announced that it intends to reintroduce or rectify or remedy citizenship stripping laws in relation to people who have been convicted or who are potentially suspected of having committed terrorist acts. And so we're happy enough to make them somebody else's problem. We're happy enough to say, well, you'll have to be deported to another country, you're not our problem anymore, rather than take responsibility as a global citizen as a global citizen for those people. And but one hopes that, at least in relation to the women and children that are currently stranded in Syria, that there may be some movement there. But this idea of citizenship stripping, that it's something that can be just taken away, is something that is incredibly concerning. It's always concerned us as an organisation and where that can lead, and the ever lowering standard for that to occur, or threshold for that to occur to people. The idea that there are true citizens and part citizens where their citizenship can be taken away. It's deeply concerning. And then you overlay that with our tradition of ignoring international law, and I think perhaps most tellingly documented. And I remember being overseas at the time this happened. I remember being in London at the time that Australia decided to excise its own territorial waters to try to stop asylum seekers accessing judicial review. People couldn't believe it. And yet we did. We were happy to resort to legal fictions and in order to try and prevent what one would think is the most basic of rights to access review by an independent umpire. And even more sadly, as a result of our treatment of refugees and people seeking asylum, our model of cruelty and detention is being exported to the world. It's now the Australian model. So with the proposed deporting of refugees and people seeking asylum to Rwanda in the United Kingdom. So that's what we are now, where we are obstructing OPCAT inspectors, we're stripping citizenship, and we're now known throughout the world for a particular model of cruelty which can result in some short-term electoral gain. So that's the bad budget. Now I'll get on to the good news. But the reason I dwell on those issues is just to say, after the election, and given perhaps a positive path of reform, it's tempting to think, well, maybe things are going to be a bit more on the back burner, or perhaps the human rights community, civil liberties community can have some breathing space. But that's certainly not going to be the case. We're coming into a state election, and we'll see whether the politicians can resist that very powerful urge to have another law and order auction election, and a change of government doesn't result in a change of approach, and it certainly doesn't result in a change of approach where we remain the only Western democracy without a Bill of Rights at a federal level. And it's no wonder that we treat our obligations so shabbily and are willing to have our politicians are willing to politicise human rights norms when we don't even have that most basic document at a federal level that would seek to protect rights of those who are most vulnerable. I'd just like to acknowledge the truly outstanding work that everyone has been doing in Liberty Victoria over the past year, and it's really been a pleasure to be able to lead the organisation. It's difficult to think back so far, but we started with the Djokovic affair. That was only a year ago, and the year has been full of incredible events, the change of government, revelations of secret ministerial appointments, the Optus mass data breach. There's never a dull day in the civil liberties and human rights landscape in Australia and in Victoria. But we've been busy over that time, and we've made over 50 media appearances. We've made some 16 submissions to government. And I just pause there. That's such a core part of our work and what we do, and I'm so pleased by the quality of the work that our committee members and volunteers are able to produce. It really is a testament to the dedication of people that we're able to produce those kinds of submissions, and that is why we have legitimacy. So thank you for everyone who's been involved in those. And we've done over a dozen press releases. And I should also acknowledge, as I did last year, but I'd like to acknowledge it again, the work done by Julia Kretzenbacher, our Media Vice President, because the work of the media team has really been in part due to what she created and the culture she fostered in her time as President, and that's enabled us to respond in a really dynamic way and try to keep Liberty Victoria's perspective in relation to these issues in the media. I'm also pleased to report that we've consciously sought to build our relationship with other civil liberties organisations over the past year, and that included writing a joint letter, an open letter to the new Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, and on behalf of a range of civil liberties organisations that we hope will in some way set out what we regard as being a positive agenda for a progressive, emotionally progressive government. And we're pleased to see that there's been some very significant developments already. Discontinuance of the Bernie Collaery prosecution perhaps being one of the most immediately apparent. And certainly, whilst it's not all good news, as I opened on, we do have an opportunity to campaign for positive change, and that may include campaigning positively in relation to an Indigenous voice. But I'm also mindful that if we do that, we need to acknowledge that we're not a representative body of First Nations peoples, and we need to listen very carefully to the wishes of different First Nations peoples in relation to voice, truth-telling, makarrata. So, but it is an exciting time in relation to hopefully having a positive agenda for reform in some respects. In relation to our working groups, we have 4 terrific working groups that work in different areas, and we have an annual report now, so I'd urge people to read the report. I've got remarks in there and we summarise some of the submissions that we do, some of the work that we've done in media with those. In short, the Criminal Justice Working Group has continued to try to address the bipartisan embrace of penal populism. We have seen the entrenchment of mandatory and presumptive sentencing in Victoria. We've seen the draconian bail and parole reforms. We've now seen the consequences, the tragic consequences of those reforms. And we wait to see whether there is a change after the state election. It won't be before the state election, realistically, but something has to give because the idea that a person can commit a shop theft whilst on bail for a shop theft and be in the same position when it comes to being granted bail as a murderer or terrorist is ridiculous and disproportionately affects women and First Nations peoples, and people die. We've made submissions in other areas in criminal justice, including the rights of children affected by parental incarceration, sexual offence reform, criminalising grossly offensive public conduct, expanded police powers. It's been a busy time in the criminal space. We also have been very concerned about the emergence of far-right extremism, and I'd urge people to read our submission in that space because I'm very proud of our work in that space, in part because we have to toe a very delicate, difficult balance between sometimes tolerating speech, which we don't want to, but also making sure people are safe and also making sure that responses to threats don't disproportionately affect particular communities, such as the Muslim community, and that censorship and surveillance isn't employed in a disproportionate, draconian way. Other work that we've done includes, and this is particularly the Government Regulation and Equality Group, they've continued to advocate for a charter of human rights, a federal charter, The group did amazing work in the review of Victoria's pandemic-specific legislation, and the reforms to the Public Health and Wellbeing Act are a testament to that work and the specific pandemic powers now, which better balance human rights and the need for community protection. I'm also very pleased, and I'd like to acknowledge Catherine Brown's work in relation to the policy on climate change, which is now people can find on our website, and that was something that was, I think, really missing in our otherwise very comprehensive range of policy positions. And of course, we know that also, the climate change disproportionately affects sections of the community, young people, First Nations peoples, our neighbours, and it really is a healthy environment, a clean environment really is a precondition for the enjoyment of other rights. I'm also very proud of the work that we've done in relation to the very poor treatment of LGBTIQ people in the community, and particularly the campaigning that we did as part of the federal election campaign when young and vulnerable trans and gender diverse people did become political footballs. And I'm not going to dwell on the Voltaire dinner tonight, but I'd urge everyone who's here to come. Hopefully you are already, but I'm very proud to lead an organisation that has awarded the main award to Brenda Appleton for her work in that space, despite what can be quite confronting and unsettling abuse that the acknowledgement of that work can generate online and the harm that can cause. So I'm very proud of the work in that space. I'm also proud of the work of our refugees and people seeking asylum working group, and particularly their battles in relation to bills, particularly when before the last election the government was desperate for a wedge and really wanted to try to wedge the opposition, and yet through the work of us together with other NGOs, we're able to resist some of the more draconian aspects of those reforms, including character cancellation reforms. And so, again, great work in that space. I'd also like to acknowledge in that space the work of Sister Bridget Arthur, who this year was awarded an Order of Australia and the Victorian Civil Justice Award in recognition of her long-standing commitment to social justice and human rights. And we're very lucky to have you on our committee and part of our organisation. Thank you for everything you've done. In the privacy space, again, we've campaigned hard for needing a better framework that respects human rights and improvements to the health legislation, information sharing bill. We led at the front when it came to the response to the Optus mass data breach and the need to preserve as best we can privacy in a digital world where it appears that sometimes privacy is seen as something quaint, out of fashion, and sometimes it feels that you're trying to keep against the tide when it comes to respect for privacy, but it's such important work, and it's work that when we do speak out about really is amplified, and I think that's because people have a desire to certain people to see that privacy protected, and they know the importance of being left alone, how dangerous it is if you don't have meaningful privacy protections. I'm also very pleased to say that the Rights Advocacy Project under Rochelle Francis and the committee has gone from strength to strength. It's been recognised in our Constitution. It does amazing work. It's inspiring. It sets the legislative agenda. The reports this year have included police panopticon zooming in on the use of body-worn cameras by Victoria police officers and a policy of equality, painful periods as a workplace issue. Those reports can be found on the RAP website, and as I think I've said perhaps more than once now, RAP, formerly Young Liberty, has been foundational in reinvigorating us as an organisation, in giving us ideas of policy reforms, and it's such an important part of us as an organisation, and I'm thankful for all that have been involved with it. As I said, I'm very pleased to I'm very pleased that we're going to return to an in-person Voltaire dinner this year, and on the 18th of November you can read in the annual general report about the very worthy winners, and excuse me for saying this, but tickets are going fast. It will be an excellent evening and a real celebration, and already the tickets are moving quite well, which gives me great confidence that it will be a well-attended event, and people, I think, after the last 2 years want to get back together, want to be around people who care about civil liberties and human rights, and want to celebrate the achievements of those very worthy winners. All right. Now, I'd like to acknowledge and thank everyone who's been part of us over the past year, and there are too many people to thank individually, one by one. I've already gone for perhaps longer than I should have, but there are some people that I'd like to thank in particular. I'd like to thank Michael Drapak, whose generosity is incredibly important to us continuing to be an effective organisation in the civil liberties and human rights space. He is a big supporter of the Leadership Fund, and an example of the work the Leadership Fund does is that this year we did media training for the media group through the Leadership Fund, which was wonderful. It was a day where we had some great training in relation to not speaking too long at AGMs, but I don't know, it was a fantastic day and very beneficial. I'd like to also thank some others, Mail Himbury, who's here tonight, I think, and who does an incredible job every day with the links. And can I say, this happens more than weekly. I get a call from one of my parents who says, "Who does the links? They're so good, the links." And it's beyond. It goes beyond Canberra. Can I say it's not just in Canberra, but I do continually get feedback about how beneficial it is to have those links. So thank you very much for that. It is a good start to the day to see what's going on in the space, and it's a valuable resource for our members and supporters. I'd like to thank Sally Ann Raher and Jill Rushell from Red Letter Fundraising for their assistance. I'd like to thank Lindy Smith, who does amazing work as our volunteer coordinator, and we've had some just wonderful volunteers in the past year assist with our submission writing. I'd like to thank Adam Pulford in relation to media work, and Andrew Rawson in relation to his IT and design support. And I'd like to thank all of our committee members. I'd also like to thank Thomas, who can't be here tonight, Thomas Kane, but again has been, perhaps against his better judgment, has been instrumental in helping organise the Voltaire again this year, and that's we're incredibly grateful. And of course, I'd also like to thank Grace, who without you, we just wouldn't function at all as an organisation. And so all the work that you do, people only see a fraction of it. And thank you so much for everything you do. All right, so I suppose just in closing, I'll just say that I'm hopeful that in the year ahead we'll continue to rise to meet the challenges. They're likely to be significant, sometimes unexpected. Who knows what the next Djokovic affair will be, or what the next event will be, such as unthinkable things such as blocking OPCAT inspectors. But it'll be a full year, and I have no doubt that with the calibre of the people that we have as an organisation, we will be able to meet whatever challenges the year throws at us, including perhaps most pressingly the state election. So thank you very much. We might just pause now to see if our guest has joined us. So thank you very much.